thank you for giving us
Yeah,
the opportunity. Not many people are rushing. Listen, we're usually on the phone like, yo, like having to see about stuff. Not many people are coming to us saying, hey, let me tell you about this. So first of
yeah,
all, thank you. I
yeah.
appreciate that a ton. And I think you kind of you said it when we first got on here, but boy, this stuff is a mess, ain't it?
It's a mess.
It's
All
a
of this is a mess. Yeah,
it is a mess. So I guess um first, I know Wild Style has questions. I want Wild
yeah.
Style to get to those first, and then
Okay.
I have some that I'll just plug in as we go. So Wild Style,
Yeah.
floor is yours.
Okay. Well, really, I mean, tell us about your responsibilities as the city county council vice president, because I'm not even sure what that means. I think we have a majority leader and a minority leader, and how is that different than what
Yeah.
Bob's role is as council president?
And this is, this is not necessarily how the responsibility has been taken on always, but the responsibility is very limited. Like as a vice president of the council, my job is to represent the whole council, but basically on paper, the biggest job is to be there if the president's unable to run a meeting.
Okay.
Like other than that, it doesn't include any of the responsibilities of the president. Now, I don't know if like say VOP was on leave or something, if I would then be made an interim president kind of thing. But as of now, and my 6 years now in the council, none of that's happened. When Zach was vice president or in the first 2 years of my vice presidency. But I don't sign contracts. I don't decide the agendas. I don't do any of that kind of stuff. I am there to help provide leadership and direction. Um, but really, a lot of that stuff is done when they talk about like leadership meetings for the council, like the committee on committees. That's the president and the majority and minority leader. The vice president is not a part of that.
Oh,
So when it comes to like those big decision making, when it comes to signing contracts, when it comes to hiring staff, all that stuff falls in the presidential office or in the office with the minority and majority leader. So really, outside of being ready to step up if VOP was out sick, there's not much on paper that the vice president responsibilities that are any different than any other counselor, I guess. I know it makes it sound weak, but we are kind of a weak legislative model under a heavy
yeah.
executive in a state that this is a weird thing. So I always this is really nerdy, but if like I like The Wire, the show The Wire, and you watch it and these Baltimore city councilors, and it's based on reality, have all this power. And you go, why do they have all this power? And then you look, and in the Maryland state constitution, Baltimore is written in there as an existing entity. So then they have this power. The city of Indianapolis is not at all in our state constitution. It is, in fact, created by the state legislature. That means they can do anything they want to us, basically, as we are created by them. So they built an executive heavy, legislative supported thing. So it's like this weird level of technically what the council does is we're the fiduciary body, and thus we can pass resolutions, not laws, but resolutions that are relate to that. So if you can, we can write HR laws because, or HR resolutions, guidelines. We don't do any criminal law. It's not like state house or anything like that. Um, but if we can do HR stuff because we control the budget, right? So we can work on changing those things. When it comes to like our power over the executive branch outside of voting against something that they placed or overturning a veto, something like that. Our highest level of power against the mayor, against any executive, not just if it was Hogsett, but if it was anybody, is to censure, which in is kind of like a special resolution, basically from the council admonishing the mayor. We have no ability to recall. We have no ability to impeach. All that stuff is held by the state house. And I hate that. I hate that we are just in this spot where we're kind of, you know, I'm a representative of my community. I fight for my community, but unless it falls in that financial area, outside of that, we just really have a good soapbox, right? And that's kind of what we do. And that always surprises everybody, but it's how Indianapolis was built to give us. We don't have strong teeth. right? We can hold the budget. That's about the biggest, most impactful thing we do. But then we realize that that is thousands of jobs in the city of Indianapolis. So if you screw around with that, you're harming a lot of people who are working at low wage jobs that need their paychecks. So there's a lot of weight in doing something big like that.
By way of like of power and the power that you
Yeah.
all hold, what like so then how do you view you all's power? For instance, you talked about like the platform you guys are on, right?
Mhm.
And so with your platform and speaking for your community, you also end up getting close to your community and they begin to trust
Mhm.
you to be their voice, right? And
Yep.
so with that way, don't you think that holds power? So like even if it's things so like right now, obviously they're calling for Hogsett's resignation, but
Mhm.
even though you don't technically have the power to do that, I think it speaks volumes to still say it because you're kind of letting your district know too that the person that they've elected to speak for them, this is their perspective on this situation that he can no longer be an effective leader for our city. And so, like, what do you think about that power, though?
I 100% agree with the power of the soapbox and what you're saying. Um, and I know a lot of the counselors are feeling pressures because of their district. My district is weird in that it is 100% inside the city of Lawrence also. And there's a lot of focus on what's happening with the Lawrence mayor too. So it can get a little confusing for my constituents. And I know, and this is not any kind of reflection of my community, but they're kind of overwhelmed with both, I think, and I haven't heard a ton. But then this is where I have the weight of that vice president that I have to be careful of because I am a representative of the council. So far, if you remove myself and VOP, so 4 out of 23 have called for resignation. I need to know that the council is headed that way or that a majority of councilors is going that way because to swing that title as a representative of the council, it is important to me to know I'm not misrepresenting the opinions of the fellow councilors. That being said, if that is the way we are going, I will gladly join with them. But it's just like being a representative of my district. So I have to put away sometimes my own opinions to do what my district wants and needs. Even though that may not be the way Ali would have chosen to do it, it's important because I am a representative to do it that way.
So I have,
And I know that sounds a little like a cop out, but I want to be respectful of my colleagues in that way.
I think I actually can understand that. I think it is politics, and at the end of the day, calling for a resignation too early isn't going to achieve a desired effect.
Yeah.
Um, so I have some technical questions.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
There was minor controversy about the first resolution vote for an investigation. You and Councilor McCormick said that y'all believe the focus was too narrowly focused on the actions of a few individuals and limited in its scope to result in meaningful or lasting protections for city employees.
Yes.
So, were you satisfied with the scope of the investigation that Fisher Phillips actually delivered?
No. So that resolution that both Jess and I voted against, there were two things wrong with it that really bothered me. One is that it mentioned Thomas Cook's name repeatedly in it. And at that point, I believe this is around August like 10th or 12th or something, that we voted on that. And at that point, I knew it had not come out yet, but because women talk to women, right? I knew there were stories coming out about Rusty Carr and Matt Pleasant, right? So it was essential to me. And at that point, I couldn't say that out loud because one thing that I take very seriously is not, and I know that sounds funny with the reason of my statement, and I can get to that eventually. Um, but I can't tell someone else's story. And it is very important to me that I am there to support them when they're ready. So as I was being contacted, and that included by people who, without being too specific, were either current or former council staff that had received dick pics and inappropriate text messages from these men, it was very important to me that this not be focused on Thomas Cook.
Right.
That being said, it is incredibly upsetting to me that knowing, and this is no way in shape or form to demean or diminish anything Caroline or Lauren related or anything Thomas Cook related, but we know all of the Matt Pleasant stuff and all of the Rusty Carr stuff happened inside the administration from them to other employees while they were employed underneath them. And because we are limited in what the scope of the focus could have been, right? Because we are the city body, we had to stay in that city focus. The fact that they never reached out to any of those women, whether the self identified victims or others who had reached out to talk, they didn't try to subpoena any of them. That is incredibly concerning to me. And that seems to and that scope was not limited in the contract. It says it's to investigate the culture of the administration and what is going on. In my mind, and when I saw that and when it came through approved by the committee and what VOP signed, I've gone through this a million times trying to figure out where Carlino claims that the scope was limited. I can't find it. Everything is exactly the same from what she approved in her committee to that. But it seems as though somehow the scope was limited as the process was happening to not include those people, those survivors, and others. And that to me is really concerning. And yeah, and I can give you something off the record on that, but I don't want to ruin your recording at the moment. That has been brought to me since then. That's genuinely very concerning about this whole investigation. But that limiting of scope, some reason that they did not talk to these other people. If we're talking about a culture, it's not just about Thomas Cook. And trust me, I
Right.
would love to pin everything on Thomas Cook. That man and I have not liked each other since the moment we met in 2008. I have no desire to protect him. You can look back if you can find his old blog, Blue Indiana. He helped Jim Schellinger, and I was supporting Jill Long Thompson for governor. And he destroyed me as a 23-year-old kid coming into Indiana politics. He didn't. He's an asshole and has been his whole life. So there's not one ounce of me that wants to protect him, let alone stop this investigation. But that narrowing of scope is incredibly concerning. Some other things that are incredibly concerning to me is there's another person who is named the most in the report. She was never contacted at all by Fisher Phillips, not once. And Brittany Doyle, her name is in there more than anybody else because she was at the party when these emails and things were corresponding, and she's sadly has to play a position of a messenger that put her in a bad spot. But never once did Fisher Phillips reach out to her. And now when she as an attorney and as a person gets searched online, this is what's going to come up. And you know whose name isn't in there is Thomas Cook. That's
Right.
bullshit. Um, I'm very upset that we gave, and another thing that was important to me in limiting, not in limiting the scope, but in limiting individual counselors' ability to subpoena, is that we gave the majority of that caucus committee the ability to subpoena anyone, anything. I didn't want any one person to do it because I didn't want any one person who had an HR vendetta to start pulling people's records. So that's why I wanted a majority. Um, they could have called Thomas. They could have called the mayor. They could have called any of these people up there and in front of the committee to answer to the committee in a public forum. And the committee never did that. And that to me is beyond upsetting. Um, so in when I see those reports and it says so and so did not answer, so and so did not answer, we gave you subpoena power. We gave it to the committee. They should have exercised it. And between that, the fact that for some reason Matt Pleasant, Rusty Carr were not included in this. Their victims, their survivors. I'm sorry, I keep going back and forth between victims and survivors. And sometimes it's how I feel in a day is some days I feel like a victim, some days I feel like a survivor in this stuff. Um, that bothers me more than just about anything else because it is a culture. And if it is a culture and the report says it is, then the focus needs to be more than just the one person. And yeah, both of those things are concerning to me. um, in the scope. And neither of those things were limited in that contract. Both of those things, they had the subpoena power, and they should have looked at the entirety of everything. So that's, if we want to talk limited scope, that's where my brain is.
Um, Now some more very
Yeah,
technical questions. To your knowledge, did any of the whistleblowers, and I'm talking about Lauren Roberts or Carolyn Ellert, reach out to you or your colleagues before the June 9th council meeting about the inaccuracies of the investigative report?
I can say that they did not reach out to me. Um, when it comes to everybody else, I honestly don't know. Um, I would assume there was people who knew that they were coming to the council meeting because they were upset. I was getting text messages. I had a friend who was in there who was being honored for something else who was like, hey, because we're up in caucus before the meeting. Hey, there's, people are showing up. So there was an expectation that people would be there. Um, but I had not been contacted, so I can't speak to anybody else on that. Um, but I, I would assume.
Did you or any other of the counselors, leadership or otherwise, talk to Vop, the city council president, about what his plan would be if these survivors showed up wanting to speak about their stories being not accurate in the press due to the investigation?
We had anticipated them wanting to speak when we got to the part of it where it was germane. So there's a lot of rules when it comes to council, and there's a lot of reason for those rules, the 2-minute limitation, they have to be germane and things like that. Um, but how these things are supposed to handle is that these kind of the public comments, the ability to give people long form times to speak, are supposed to happen in committee. And if you feel, as a committee chair, if you feel that more people deserve to be heard than what's going to be able to happen at the full council meeting, it is your responsibility to hold a meeting to allow that. Um, and so it was kind of a perfect storm. Never once did the committee ever hear from the public, including Lauren or Elise or whoever wanted to speak at the meeting that the presentation happened. In fact, Carlino repeatedly said that they would be heard afterwards, and then she immediately gavelled out um, because she had lost control of that meeting, and that's a problem. And I can speak from experience when it came to the reappointment of Kelly Diamond, when after we had a meeting and then all of a sudden got inundated with public comment, we held a special community affairs meeting where we had over 100 people come and speak. I chair that committee. We held a special committee to make sure everyone felt heard. That's important. And that's where things like this should happen, because how things work in the process of council, it has to be germane at a public hearing for it to work. And I know that seems harsh, and the way VOP handled it is not the way I would have. And I can tell you, and I know, Sam, you were in that room, and because people will be like, why didn't you do anything? It was so shocking at the moment between the sheriffs and then the press descending, which was kind of a chaotic. I just froze, um, you know, and that's not how I would have handled it. But there's a reason, because we've had to shut people off the microphones who are saying horrible anti-trans things or horrible, just, you can't, to protect everyone's it sucks. To protect everyone's First Amendment rights, you have to hold the same standard to everything, right? And because she went up there to speak on a non-germane bill and then went up there and saying she wouldn't stop and the time limit and all that kind of stuff, that it it was bad. Had I known that this was the intention, what we could have done at the very beginning, they offer a time for special guests. What I could have done, if I knew that this was their plan, or whoever knew this was their plan, we could have called a time. I could have said, point of privilege, Mr. President, we have a special guest in the room who would like to speak. And we've done that. The best way to go see those kind of things is going back to COVID and the amount of times we called Dr. Kane up to do a presentation to the city, to the county, to make sure people were aware. But because this seemed, uh, you know, it just became chaotic. Stuff like that couldn't have been called. Um, it was it's it's a terrible no-win situation for everyone in that. And I hate to say it, you see people pulled out of there, and we have to shut people off on time. I had to do it. Now there was no physical removal, but there were multiple times where during like the animal care and control thing, I had to say, sorry, your time is up. Sorry, your time is up. No, you can't share your time with somebody else. That's not, we had to follow these rules that were established, even though people may have a lot to say. Um, and that's just the nature of the council. That's why the importance of having committees and allowing that public comment in committees is so important. Because if you're doing your job as a counselor, you sit on a bunch of committees. I sit on three, but I watch all of them. And because it's important to me to know what's happening in these public comments on all of them, even if they're not necessarily germane to the committees I sit on. So that was an issue.
With something that you just said, you were saying
Mhm.
if you guys had known ahead of time, you could have, maybe did something different. I think it's also fair to acknowledge that they felt like they had to force it in
Yeah,
to be heard because of the denials before to have space to be
absolutely.
heard, both personally and in the meetings, to your point. So I think I don't want to speak for them, but if I got no, 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 and a lot of, people ignoring me, and now I'm at my, last resort, I wouldn't think, oh, let me give them a heads up and let's see if we can figure
No,
something out. I,
I 100% agree with you, Sam. I come from the activist space. I know what it's like to be shut out, shut out, shut out, and feeling like this is your last chance. There is just a whole bunch of times that we as the council fucked up because they shouldn't have been shut out. They shouldn't have been shut out of committee. They shouldn't have been, that we should have been able to call for personal privilege and give them time to speak and address the whole council. It was a perfect clusterfuck of things were bad. And it is something that we have to deal with. It's something um, that was just it was just bad all around, and it was a perfect storm of a clusterfuck. I'm sorry if I'm not allowed to curse. I'm
no,
sorry,
you're
guys.
okay. You're okay.
Okay,
So for
I'm trying not to, but
yeah, yeah, yeah. For people who hear that, right? Hear that in that moment you just froze. You were shocked by what you were seeing. What about the people who say that like, well, then you shouldn't be in leadership because that's when we need a leader to speak up, to stand up, to protect those survivors in the room who are trying to make comment. Like, what do you say back to that? Because I think it's possible to have good intentions, be frozen in that moment. But I also think it's possible to be a good counselor and not necessarily the right one to be in leadership. So, what do you say to that?
I hear you, and I completely understand that. And I can just tell you that sometimes as a leader, it's also that when your weaknesses are, and that was something that I had discussed with Caucus when it particularly comes to this issue. And it's something that I had pushed back a lot and had kind of dealt with off and on. And then, frankly, between hearing all this and knowing, and I'm sure you all have seen, Lauren reached out to me in 2019 to tell me Thomas had been creepy with her. She obviously didn't send the full extent of everything. And then being in the office in 2019 with Caroline and then feeling some guilt that I could have done something. I had no idea, but I could have done something, right? Between that and then the vote on August 10th that was manipulated by some people, or August 12th, whatever, when I voted against that resolution because it was so narrow of a scope to only be on Thomas Cook. It was manipulated by some people to say that I was intentionally harming women. There were posts saying Ali Brown is terrible for women. They're not safe in Indiana. And this is something, and I know you guys both know this because you knew me before all this stuff. I have committed my life to working to making Indiana a better place, whether that's working in LGBTQ politics as a woman, working in women's rights and abortion access and all this kind of stuff. And I had fought in 2018 and 2019 to do some of this stuff with the state party to add these things and been shut down repeatedly. It kind of came to a perfect spot that I started to have panic attacks, PTSD related panic attacks, where about 5 to 7 times a day, I was all of a sudden, I would get cold and I would feel the snow and I would see the face and I would feel it. And it would kept coming back to the point that there were times where I was here at work and I was underneath my desk crying and shaking because I couldn't handle it. And so at that point, the only people that I had ever told about it were my therapist and my husband, to any extent. And so I went to Caucus, and I couldn't speak about any of this without crying or shaking. And you can even look at some of the old council videos from when all this was going on and it was happening. And so I said, I need to step back for this on this issue. It's something I wanted to take a lead on. It's something I wanted to help on. It's something I believe needed to be done. And you can never get somebody who was assaulted justice because you can never take back what happened to somebody, right? You can never have undone what was done. And we're not criminal prosecution either. So what we could do was do our best to make sure that this never happens again. And that to me is so important. But all this started to happen and I wasn't able to function. And I told my caucus why. And at that point I hadn't even told my mom. Um, and 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 because of that, I need to step back. And they all knew that. Um, and so this has been something really hard for me. It's been hard for me for the past year to take things on the chin when people attack me for not being outspoken on this and not doing things. But the problem is, I feel as though when I do speak on it, my voice cracks and I shake and I get scared. And the women don't deserve that. They deserve a strong voice on this. So I know my weaknesses and my strengths, and this is a weakness for me. So I stepped away and I didn't talk about it and I didn't tell anybody because none of this story is ever about me. And until I got attacked for what Krista damn well knew, I had asked to step away. I had never handled the contract. I had never handled the picking of Fisher Phillips. I had stepped back on that. I had worked to try to form this committee. And then that's the point that everything fell apart in my brain. I stepped back. So in that moment, I just froze. And that's not ideal. And that's not what you want from a leader. But it's the only explanation I can give. I have thrown myself out of a car to go help a car accident, help people. I have stepped in front of bigots attacking my friends. I have done these things, but in that moment, I couldn't move. And maybe that means I shouldn't be leadership. And that's okay. And if that's what my colleagues decide, that is fine. I don't have a problem not being strong if I can't be, but I do have a problem being attacked for something I couldn't control. And that's where this has caused me harm. But this isn't about me. And I'm so pissed off because the headline from that committee meeting should have been from the financial meeting should have been that these people had finally gotten to speak and had been heard and all that kind of stuff. And instead, it's a bunch of bullshit out of Carlino's mouth, weaponizing her tears against people because she failed as a committee chair to do her damn job for whatever reason she's going to give. She failed to bring people up on a subpoenas in front of her. She was the conduit to us in caucus. Our leader would call on her to give us updates in committee because she was the only one of us in contact with Fisher Phillips. She's the one who pushed and decided how these committee meetings would go. And when she failed, she put all the blame on everybody else. And I think so much of this has been a lack of responsibility on everybody's part to say where they fucked up. Thomas Cook has taken no responsibility. Rusty Carr and Matt Pleasant have taken no responsibility for the harm that they have caused people that they will deal with for the rest of their lives. The mayor has taken no responsibility for his actions between hiring, creating an atmosphere like that, or from the text messages that he sent those women. Carlino has taken no responsibility for how she mishandled this entire committee process that she desperately wanted to chair. She wanted this. She seems to be more trying to be an Instagram influencer politician than she does to actually serve the people and do the work. I'm going to take responsibility for what I have to take what is my fault. I should have stood up. I should have stopped it. I should have said earlier to what was going on, and I wish I was fucking stronger. But this is where I failed. And I failed to stand up in that moment. And if my colleagues decide that that is enough grounds to remove me, then I respect their opinion. And that I will. So, I mean, VOP has said that he apologized. And I can tell you, as VOP and I are incredibly different people in our emotions and how we do things, that he spent far too much time dwelling on the message instead of the apology, but he believed it and he just was trying to figure it out, how he was going to say what he was going to say. But that makes no excuse for any of us. It doesn't matter to victims and to others. There is failure all around, but you have to take responsibility for where you failed. And I will take mine and yeah. And we'll have a caucus and we'll discuss this.
So,
I
oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Wasa. Sorry.
I think from my perspective, and I think from a lot of people's perspectives, that they don't expect y'all to be military commanders being able to take charge of a situation like that, but they do expect y'all to be great planners, great administrators. And I think the biggest pushback, I don't think, is necessarily whether somebody stopped and took the gavel from VOP. It was, how did it ever get to that point? Because most counselors did know that these people were coming. Even myself was posting created a flyer and posted it for everyone to come out to this meeting. So I think that the bigger indictment is, from a lot of people's perspective, especially my own, is the failure to plan, the failure to recognize those survivors and to make sure that everyone was either reaching out or at least responding to them to make sure that there would not be us putting you yourself or the rest of the council, and but especially them, in, in a
Yeah.
position where violence is used to silence them. And I think that's a hard situation. Not as much for you, given your responsibility, but for Vop himself, who I can look anybody in the eye and I can show them the text messages that I set up a meeting with Vop last year after I was horrified to see people thrown out of council meetings that I know had been ignored by city council during the public comments. And we had a great conversation. I've always been skeptical about Vop, but I've known him for 10 years. I've been skeptical, but we had a great conversation. And then he turned
Mhm.
around and did worse a couple of months later, and like having the wrong person in a wheelchair thrown out. Um, all of that is, I mean, I'm just preparing you for what will probably get said by
Yeah.
myself. But I mean, it's difficult to take to see that side of it, that somebody was responsible for this, the lack of planning or the planning to do what happened in that meeting. I just it's hard for me to believe that everybody sat up there and had no idea, like, and then when it jumped off, like, well, that was the only thing I could think of doing, when most people knew that they were coming. There were, I'm sure, counselors that actually asked Vop what he was going to do if this happened. And so, I mean, that's just one of those heavy lifts. Like people understand that there's enough talk going around. People understand this.
Yeah.
Also, the germaneness of her point was the budget that was part of the budget that was paying for this investigation that
Hmm.
messed her story was what she was speaking on. Like,
Hmm.
so even the ideal that it wasn't germane is even
Well, we hadn't gotten to 164 when Lauren went to take the mic, which was part of the issue too. So we needed her. We needed her to wait till 164. Sorry, I think it's 164, but it wasn't the financial. My brain is a little
okay.
funky on the numbers, but it wasn't that. Not that that excuses the behavior either, because I completely agree with you, Wildstyle. It was complete. What is it? The failure to plan is a plan to fail.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
that's in the same way that you were saying that the survivors could have reached out to you all in that way. It's like, well, you guys knowing that this was going to happen, you all could have also reached out to them and said, "Hey, we know you guys are, planning to come speak. Let's set
Mhm.
this up so that you'll have the time that you need at the start of the meeting." Blah blah. Like that could have went the other way, especially knowing that from you all's perspective, knowing what the possibilities are and what you
Mhm.
can and can't allow, like being able to explain to them beforehand, listen, you're
Yeah,
going to have a hard 2 minute cutoff. So how about we just bring you in as a special guest? I think it's almost
yeah.
like too in that situation that Bob was more concerned about control and controlling the meeting.
Control.
Yes, than he was about making sure that things were heard that needed to be heard to make quality decisions. And I think that's why they came to testify. It's just like you cannot make decisions about a report that's incorrect, that doesn't include all the details that
Mhm.
I know it doesn't include because I gave almost 50 pages that they didn't include most details from. Like, like all of those things.
Yeah.
I think that's why it was one important to hear as survivors, not just survivors hearing their story, but also how can you make an effective decision without knowing their perspective of this report. I think both of those points are important. And in that moment, and I'll say this because I'm going to say this on our podcast. I think all the counselors failed in that
Yeah.
moment because it wasn't just you that was silent. Nobody said anything until after the fact, which I thought was horrendous. Everybody should have said something. Somebody should have stand up and at least tried, right? Like, is this? There even could have been somebody who just raised up and is like, "Is this necessary? Like, Vop, do we have to do this? Is
Mhm.
that like?" Can we
Right.
just pause? Can we, what is can we recess? Is there a different option that we can create? Can we vote on something on the fly right now that gives her an extra 15 seconds? Because that was all she needed. Her
Yeah.
first statement was
A
two
hundred
minutes and
percent.
15 seconds.
We should have called a recess. We should have called a recess, one, to calm everyone down in the room, right? And two, we should have called a recess to allow a point of privilege for her to speak. And I know that, and I hate to say it, I know that now. And that's not okay. And I know I've watched the tape back. I feel like I've watched the tape back a dozen times more than that. And I can see it all seems clear now. But at that moment, that wasn't in my brain. And I know that. And I know that that answer's not satisfactory for anybody. And I know that. But I agree with you, Sam. People need to be heard. And I just said this to you guys and stuff, but in a weird way, as much as I tried to hide what was happening to me and have to deal with all the stuff, saying it out loud this week to my mom, I had to tell my mother-in-law, I had to tell my brother, I had to talk to reporters. I had reporters asking me if I could describe the face of the person or where they touch, like all this kind of stuff in a weird way. Finally saying everything out loud to people has helped me reclaim a little bit of my power in this. And I denied that from people by not standing up. And it's not fucking about me. So it doesn't matter that I feel terrible, but something, it went wrong. And I, I hate, I hate, I can't provide justice for how I failed, right? I can't go back and relive that moment as much as I want and fix it. But you know, what I can do is figure out how we got to that moment once again and make sure it never fucking happens again. But that's not the answer anyone wants. But that's all I can give. And I know that's not fair to anybody.
I
Well,
think,
I mean,
yeah,
it's honest.
yeah, yeah. I mean, all any of us can do in that moment is just, yeah, be honest in that way.
Yeah.
I think, Wildstyle, you had questions about like moving forward too, right? Like,
Yeah.
um,
I mean, I probably like one last question for me.
okay.
Hmm.
Um, the Democratic caucus statement on the other Councilor Brown's removal from the caucus,
Hmm.
which talks about that the Democratic caucus is committed to working together as a team and serving the people of our city with integrity,
Hmm.
collaboration, and shared vision for progress. And then it alludes to when any member focuses on falsehoods, makes inappropriate accusations, undermines the collective benefit of our shared work, their approach does not align with the principles of the
Hmm.
caucus. So, from the outside looking in, how is this different? Jesse's removal and the supposed reasons for his removal. How is this different between what's going on between you and Councilor Carlino?
Well, Carlino did say falsehoods. I can guarantee you that. But this is where I run the risk of sounding like a spiteful woman, which I've got a couple things. One, people are always afraid of the bigger person, physically bigger, that I'm always conscious of how I portray myself. And two, the last thing I ever want this to look like is two women fighting instead of actually doing the business of this. So when it comes to how this is going to be handled, that's something I will leave to my caucus members, um, and how they see fit. Um, I have feelings, but that's not, at this point, it's too personal to me, to say these things. I have not said falsehoods. I have said the truth. And once again, also, as Jesse Brown attacks me online, he was in that caucus meeting where I told them why I was stepping back and then turned around online and attacked me for not being strong enough to do this. I don't understand how people who say they're focusing on survivors could be so fucking callous to somebody who's asking for a goddamn second. And that's where I'm hurt so bad. Had this not come out at a 7 o'clock on a Tuesday night, maybe it wouldn't be so public, but I had to defend my character by exposing something that happened to me as quickly as possible because I started getting calls from reporters instantly asking me why I blocked the scope of the investigation when I had absolutely nothing to fucking do with it. Krista wants to be vice president of the council. She's come at it twice. She's lost to me both times. She's used personal attacks against me every time she's tried. I mean, hell, in 2024, when I first ran, she was telling people that it was inappropriate for me to be in leadership because of the size of my body, because that does not what leadership looks like. So at this point, I don't care about Krista. I really don't. And if my caucus thinks my behavior in response gets me out of the caucus, then maybe it does. But the calls I've received from my fellow counselors, whether they're close counselors or counselors I'm often at odds with in that caucus, have been more so, I can't believe she said that about you. And that's, because they knew how hard this has been for me. And I felt she is passing the blame onto other people because she failed. And for her to lump me in there when she damn well knew I had nothing to do with any of this is a bunch of bullshit. And it's political opportunity. And she utilized my trauma and she banked on the fact that I wouldn't say anything or call her out because I've been so hurt. And guys, I've spent my whole life being bullied by people. I'm too nice. I'm too weird. I was the kid that didn't fit in. I can't do this anymore. I don't abide by bullying kids at my job. I'm not going to abide by being bullied on this. And so things that should be handled behind closed doors, she brought out in public. and I have to protect myself. And however the caucus chooses to proceed is on them, and I will respect them in what they decide. And so that's just, that's where it is. Um, so I haven't said anything that is not provable, that I don't have track and records or people or witnesses. Um, and so I feel completely comfortable and confident in what I have done. And it, in a way, has given me a chance to reclaim my power in this situation when I was left out as a scapegoat. So,
So a lot of us, I mean, I feel like a lot of vocal community folk, I'll say that, a lot of our vocal community folk feel like this report was completely botched. I know that there's a lot of counselors that feel that way. So next steps, what do you anticipate you on doing, or what will you advocate for the council or the caucus to do, in the wake of this horrible report that was very expensive?
I know we're going to end up spending $500,000 on this. I am my focus has been on HR policy, and that's what I'm looking at. I'm looking at what it would take to create an HR ombudsman. Because HR, you guys know, it's all for the enterprise. It doesn't care about employees. It's to protect the enterprise, right? An ombudsman in that way for our non-union employees. So our unionized employees have protections that our non-unionized employees do not. As much as I loved everybody to be unionized inside the city to have those protections, that's not how this is going to work, right? Not everyone's going to join a union, or they're not going to form one, but they should. So creating a position of an ombudsman where their job is not the enterprise, it is the employees, is incredibly important. A HR advocate, HR person. Um, we have to look at the best practices of other major cities and what they have done in their HR related policies. We have to make sure we're not taking any bias. We're making sure we're taking out all the bias in this process, because that's important. But we also have to figure this out quickly because the city council is not HR. And sitting there and listening to listening to Tuesday before everything went out went haywire, we heard from so many people who had been violated and felt like HR was not doing their job in representing and protecting them. And to me, that was shocking. Like not I expected bad stuff. I didn't expect so much. And so we have to figure out what the best way is here to proceed. And it is changing policies. It is looking at funding mechanisms. It is removing things from under the admin. It is creating independent. Like, I would love if there was a way to hire an outside organization that served as almost, for those who are non-union, almost served as that arbitrator for, like if I was an AFSCME employee and on DPW and there were issues, I could go to my union arbitrator and they would be there to protect me. How do we get that for our employees that aren't part of a union? Um, what kind of policies? Now, this may be a state house level policy, but how can we ensure that as counselors, we are able to have HR records or access to information? So I can speak to when it came to animal care and control. Um, how things work is when there is a department head. So animal care and control sits under community affairs. I'm the community affairs chair. When there's a department head, that bill gets assigned to the community affair or to that committee chair. So that's why I carried the Kelly Diamond bill, right? At no point was outside of the recommendation from the administration that I received. At no point was I given any other information, right? Because we aren't HR. So I'm not part of the hiring process. I'm not privy to HR records. I'm not privy to any of that stuff. But yet my name is on that bill and I am carrying that forward because that's, how it has been. Um, where's the process for us in that to go, I don't want this in my name. I don't want this bill. But that's, how it is. DPW's director gets assigned to DPW committee chair. So Kristen Jones is on that one. So like, or, it's admin and finance has a CFO. Like that's just how things work. But that's if my name's attached to promoting somebody to a position in the admin, then I should be privy to the records. So it's figuring that out. So we are not nominating somebody or approving somebody who has been problematic to say the least, right? But as I was looking into that kind of stuff, I think that's state law that would need to be changed.
Mhm.
And I'm not sure that they would be apt to doing that because I don't know if Braun would want people looking in the HR records of his appointees. So um, that needs to happen somehow, though, because it feels, particularly after we've sent back 2 appointees this year, um, it feels like we need more information before things are handed to us and our names are put on them.
I mean, I feel like several folks would also point to the fact that this is all evidence of an incompetent mayor. And I know that you're not ready to, call for his resignation and definitely, want to know what the rest of your caucus is doing. But I am curious about it with him and with Vop. Honestly, I'll throw Vop in here too. Like, is there a threshold for you though, where it's just like, you know what? I I hear you, caucus. I understand, but this is too far. Like, is there a threshold at which you would call for either of their resignation?
There would be a threshold for anybody.
Yeah,
Um, there's a threshold for everybody. I can't, I feel like things keep dripping out,
yeah.
and
I was just curious if it's going to be like a
like
hard line of no, I'm sticking with my caucus no matter what, or is there a point at which you would break away and say, yo, I have to say this.
if my community called that would be that, that's a thing too. My district was pushing for it. That would be a thing too. Um, yeah, I mean, I can't say exactly what the thing would be, but I
Yeah,
know there
yeah,
would be, like,
yeah, yeah.
um, but right now that's where I have to respect the title and the position I hold and make sure that the council feels the way I should. I
Yeah.
do. I don't, that's not a good answer, but it's part of being a representative of and holding a title larger than myself. And I know that others with titles feel that pressure too.
I think too, a lot of us, especially like me and Wild, I feel like a lot, but we understand the difference in approach of some folks. Like there's some folks that I could tell you there's not even issues that I just don't even bring up to them. I know they're an establishment dim. I know how they're going to, I know how they're going to feel about things. I
Yeah.
know they're gonna not gonna rock the boat internally, but if there was a community thing, right, I know I could go to them and they would fight.
Yeah.
So there's just like I think there's just differences in approaches, and I think we need people at every
Yeah.
part of that spectrum. For me, I think it's the folks like we've decided on the podcast. Well, not Wild because he likes to be called Wild Style, but we don't like to call Bop Bop anymore because it just doesn't feel fitting. Um, so we've been calling him Samuel. But there's like this feeling of it feels like he's not even on that spectrum, if that makes sense. Like it feels like there is no representation of the people that at this point it is just about control.
It-
And I struggle with us not at least admitting that he should not be in leadership. Not saying that I would never, I'll say this, I would never well, that's not true because with Nasty G I did. With Greg Taylor, I definitely said that he shouldn't be in that seat anymore. But usually I don't go against voters' choice because, that's the system that we're in. It's democratic. What the people choose is what they choose. And I'm not in his district. So there's that. But with Vop, it does seem like I know Wild Style is, but I think with Vop
I,
as the leader, right? Not necessarily resigning as a counselor, but it does seem like when the fire comes, when you really need a great leader, it seems like he always falls short. And I wonder why there aren't more of you all saying that, yo, VOP should not be in leadership anymore.
Now I hear you, but I would push back saying I think VOP is a very good leader. And what you don't see necessarily is the internal stuff and the work that is done. He is not necessarily a big external person. He's not an Instagram politician running to post everything, and I know that. But I'm also concerned that there's a push for him to resign when it's the crimes of Thomas Cook and Rusty Carr and Matt Pleasant and the mayor that are being laid at his feet. And I don't have to tell you guys that there is a history of crimes being not being committed, being laid at the feet of a black man. And that is concerning to me too. I mean, this is Bob hasn't harmed, he hasn't touched anybody. He hasn't texted anybody. He hasn't done the things that are so disgusting in that way. He has led his caucus and his council through COVID and through other things and has done work. Has he fucked up on this? Yeah. Like that council meeting was a problem, right? Were there 85 reasons why it was a problem? It could have been fixed before then. Once again, relaying Krista Carlino's terrible job as a committee chair at the FOP's feet when she repeatedly said, I have this, I'm going to do it, I'm going to handle it, I've got this. And she fails and she fails and she fails. And then she flails. And instead of doing her job, she lets FOP take it on the chin. I mean, there's some things in there that it's like, we got to step back and look at this. I don't think one bad meeting shows that he cannot lead. I think he's a very good leader and has done a good job, especially when it comes to setting the direction of where we're going and pushing back. But he's not, I hate to say it this way, there's some people who do everything and they post it out there for applause, and there's some people who just do the work. And VOP is much more of a workhorse than a show pony. And I think in situations like this, when people rush to get to Twitter or get to Instagram or whatever it is, um, to boast about themselves and to feed off of the same 15 people online that keep giving them feedback is, is something. It's something to consider in this space, because as much as there's been pushed one way, there's also been pushed the other, saying that he's doing a good job on this. And outside of one regrettable call in calling the sheriffs, that he has been doing his best to allow women to lead on this space. And he has stepped back from that. And that's, I know it's,
I think
there's,
one, I think we're just going to disagree, and I'm okay with
yeah,
that.
I
Uh,
know we're going to disagree on this. Wild started
yeah.
out disagreeing for a long time. But you guys know, when I come to you, I come from a place of, to both of you, I care deeply about our community. I do the work daily to make my community better. Um, and we all, when we agree to disagree on things, I know the three of us, when we're looking forward, we're all looking how to create the best Indianapolis that we can that actually supports everybody. Um, and I think Bob, from a perspective from knowing him from 2010 all the way through now, I think he's done a great job. And as somebody who has supported me through all of the processes and ideas that I have had, and I see him do the same with others, I think he's a really good leader. I think he had a bad meeting, but I can understand that other people would feel differently.
Bad,
So,
a bad several meetings, in fairness, a
Yeah,
bad several meetings.
definitely
And
several.
and also, I think too, it's a difference in perspective, because if you notice, you spoke a lot about how he is internally and with you all, and we
mhm,
see more so of like how he is community
yeah,
facing. But I think as the president of the council, both are important. I
I
think both
agree with
Yeah,
are
that.
important. And so,
I,
yeah,
I mean, from externally, like dealing with him, he's been the counselor over my most of my neighborhood and now all of my neighborhood for over like 15 years now. I think it
Yeah,
might be longer. I don't know, or 13 years.
yeah.
But
I think this
he's
is fourth term. Yeah.
yeah, he's been a bad counselor. I think I can tell you, that the elders in my community got together and ran somebody against him in Slating in 2019 because they hated him that much. Black people in Riverside, near Northwest, Hallville. hate Voposely. Like it just is. With the type of disrespect that I think I've seen him show us on so many different levels. Um, I don't feel like he's been a good leader. I can see why he is quite. Once you get to know him and he doesn't feel like you're a peon, he is actually great to have conversations with. I actually enjoyed the conversations I've had when I sat down with him, but I just didn't like how long it took to get there and what it took to get there. And I think that that's going to be one of the biggest issues is that he doesn't necessarily show you the side that he's shown us all these years.
Yeah, and
Ditto.
I hear
Ditto,
you on that.
unfortunately.
I
Ditto,
hear you on that,
unfortunately.
and it's hard to see
Yeah.
counselors in their districts, right? Because I know, unless I know what I do in mine, and I focus there, right? And there are some people that it's like, particularly my border people, like I know what Nick Roberts is doing oftentimes because we share parts of Lawrence or Counselor Renee Allen. She's doing so good. She's been thrown into the fire, stuff like that. But outside, as you get further away, and I've said this, and I know Sam, you're very close physically to where I am. Uh, the lack of care about what happens downtown outside of like, can I get downtown when I want to do something? Lawrence is a different beast in that way. Um, and so it's a very insular spot when you're like, because, we all, I hate to say it this way, we all have day jobs and then we're doing council stuff. And then I step into the vice president spot, which is just sometimes I'm on email, sometimes I'm not, figuring out what's going on and what's happening because some, and then I'm trying to do my best for District 10. We don't always hear how people do in district. Um, unless the only time I ever really mess with other people's districts is like if I get a reach out from somebody in Pike Township that wants to do something, but they're reaching out to me because they know me personally. And then I just connect them. I'm like, hey, Leroy's your counselor. Hey, Leroy, this is my friend. They're trying to do, so it's kind of a weird, there's a group doing autism work that is trying to deal with something in Brianne Delaney's district. And I sent an email this morning doing the exact same thing. Like, hey, Brianne, they reached out to me because I know I have autism stuff, but it's in your district. Other than that, we try to stay out of each other's districts for good reason. So
Yeah.
I don't know too much.
Yeah, but I think I'm glad Wildstyle shared their perspective too, because I actually on
Yeah.
the last episode, I think on the last episode of the Black Briefing, we actually each shared stories. Each
Mhm.
one of us
And
have
we watch,
stories.
just so you
Yeah.
know, my husband and I are, we do watch. We know it's not made for us, but we do
Oh, it's
enjoy your
okay.
takes, particularly on the Far East Side.
Yeah.
It's important, and that's the
Yeah.
thing too, is I try to watch hyper local and learn hyper local stuff.
Hmm.
And I think you guys are doing a good job talking about issues. We're going to disagree because we always do, because we're not
Yeah.
the same human being.
Yeah.
Um, I always tell people if you ever want to agree 100% with a politician, you should run for office. And then sometimes I don't always agree with what I have to do. So it's like a funny, because politics is the art of the compromise. And sometimes I just want to run people over and you can't, you got to back
You
and
go.
forth. But no, I appreciate
Yeah.
what you guys are doing.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I think both of us too, well, all of us on the podcast have perspective and leadership and stuff, and we know
Mhm.
how complex that can get and be as well. Because I think there's been a lot of times as a leader, I won't speak for them too, but there's been a lot of times as a leader I've had to carry things that I thought were just absolutely stupid, but the majority of my people wanted to do it, and I was just like, it ain't gonna hurt nothing, so let's just do it,
Yeah. Yeah.
so I definitely understand the complexity of it. I think in the last episode we talked about, especially with running for office, we need people that are more than just good people. We need people that are courageous and that can take a stand and can fight for what's right, even if they have to stand alone. And I think that's what our community craves too. So I
Mhm.
that's I think that's the perspective I'm going to take on this episode is
Yeah.
that just reiterating what we've already said is that we need courage right now. We need boldness right now, and we need people who are willing to stand up against things that are going left uh, just on the place that it's right. It's the right thing
Hmm.
to do.
Yep.
And that's I hope I see more of that from the council and from individual counselors.
I appreciate that, Sam. I really do.